Nigeria's electricity value chain paints a picture of activities between power generation, transmission, distribution, and consumption. However, the country's energy ecosystem is one that is faced with complex issues of inadequate infrastructure and the supply gap between the growing gap between supply and demand. Let's understand these challenges and what is ahead of the Minister of Power, opportunities, challenges, market potentials in the electricity value chain. I'm being joined by an energy analyst. He's also a lawyer, Dr. Ayodele Oni. Dr. Oni, good afternoon, and thank you so much for making it a date with us on the program today.
Thank you very much for having me.
It's 10 years after privatization. Yes, I really like to start this way. Let's do an assessment or an overview of what has played out so that we have a perspective, or we understand your perspective to this development. How have we fared? We're still hovering between 4,000 megawatts, not even 5,000. What is happening post-privatization?
Okay. So I think in hindsight, the privatization was good, was a step in the right direction, but the process and the ultimate beneficiaries weren't mostly the right people. That's why some of them have even lost those assets, particularly from the distribution point of view. You'd realize that when the privatization was done, you had a system where the distribution companies were sold on the basis of their promises to reduce what is known as the aggregate technical, commercial, and collection losses, ATC and C losses, aggregate technical, commercial, and collection losses, because that's the basis. Remember, in the power sector, money moves from you and I, the consumers, to the distribution companies. And distribution companies, as their name suggests, distributes power and also distributes the money across the value chain. So if the money does not get to the distribution company, or it gets to them and they do not move it up to generation companies, for the generation companies to pay for gas, then the system, the whole system is going to collapse. And that's what we have had for a while, from very low tariffs, which meant that even if everyone paid and everyone wasn't paying, the distribution companies were not getting enough to pay the generation companies. And the generation companies, remember, over 80% of our generation relies on gas. And if you don't pay me as a supplier of your gas, I'm not going to give you gas. You know, government has intervened a few times. The central banks, you've heard of NEMS, you've heard of all sorts, even metering, all of that to support at some point the payment for gas. Because for a long time, several billions of dollars was owed the gas companies. So they weren't going to supply gas. So it's a value chain thing. Once you have a part of the value chain broken, then we have a problem. Now, during the privatization, people have argued, and I did see that because I was heavily involved in the privatization, advising a number of the companies. The baseline, the basis for agreeing what your ATC and C was even wrong in the first place. You know, many people believe that it was around 40-50%, but it was probably worse than that in terms of what the electricity distribution companies were collecting. The former government-owned electricity companies that were then sold, you know. So we've had those issues. We have had poor investment. For example, between 1985 and about 2015-16, when you had former Governor Fashola as the Minister of Power, there was no investment in the national grid. Imagine that you're supposed to spend $10 billion every year for 10 years, and you spend zero. And year 10, you now realize you need to spend money, which means you should have spent $100 billion. Now, you have to take into consideration consumer price index, all of those things. What was supposed to be $10 billion in a year is probably now $12.5 billion. And you don't even have that money. So you're not going to develop. So we've neglected the power sector for a long time. And you don't expect that unless you do much, much more than you should have done in those 10, 20, 15 years, and you now do it over a period of another 5 to 10 years, you now see serious improvements. But if you do not much more, you're not going to, this is where we're going to end. And unfortunately, that's where we are. From the grid collapses every now and then to a number of distribution companies losing their assets. The guys who bought those companies, because in the first place, maybe they were even the right people in some cases, because, and maybe the privatization could have been done differently. And I say this because if people who barely have money have to put down hundreds of millions of dollars, where then do they find, and they borrowed all of that money, where then do they find money to improve the assets, to improve the infrastructure? I have only $1 million. I use it to pay for that, to become owner. Where then do I get money? Because no one's going to lend that sector money. Much of the money you see is for off-grid. And the power we need that is reasonable is on-grid. I live in an estate where they charge us over 220 naira per kilowatt hour. So I do 400,000 a month on electricity. That's ridiculous. But I almost do not have a choice. But if it was public power supply, then it will be much, much, much cheaper. So that's where the problem is. Anyone who wants to invest now is looking at off-grid, where they can easily get financing. So it's been a sad story, to be honest. It's been a sad story.
I like to start. Yes, they're a really sad story because I am concerned. South Africa, a country of about 50 million in population, is generating about 45,000 megawatts or something as at the last check. But let's now look at what the minister said lately. He also talked about gas, which you talked about, saying the surge in the price is affecting our generation. Can you make us understand how this affects us?
Okay, so the thing is, remember that in the electricity sector, gas is a pass-through. So when you have your pricing, your tariff, say your tariff should take into consideration gas price, because you need that gas. It's just like if you have a haulage business, your diesel price will determine your ultimate cost, right? So if gas prices increase, from $1.80 or $2.18 thereabout to say $2.45, that difference is going to mean that your tariffs too should increase. Now, if your tariffs don't increase, it means you do not earn sufficiently to even be able to pay for the gas. And if you can't pay for the gas, at some point, if you are in business supplying someone who manufactures raw materials and the person isn't paying you, you're going to shut off raw materials. So that's what it is. Unless tariffs then go up, and there's a mechanism under what they call the MITO, multi-year tariff order, where every 6 months they're supposed to look at certain things, indicators such as CPI, that's the Consumer Price Index, gas price, generation, volumes, and all of that to be able to change the pricing. So if the prices do not change, it then means at some point they'll stop supplying you gas. Or if they continue, if you want to continue to have power, that means prices will then go up. Consumers who do not see substantial improvement will not be willing to pay more. That's the challenge. Because, in some parts of Lagos, you'd hear people say power has improved. What's been done, in my view, is that you've denied some people power completely and then moved it. So it's been moving things around. If you continue, just the way you say, you continue to motion without moving. Motion without moving means you stay at one point and you continue to go around, but you don't move forward. So I think those must be the minister's concerns, generally speaking.
Well, recently again, we put pen to paper where the new minister signed a $463 million power distribution lines upgrade contract with a Chinese consortium. I see your smile there already. We had one at the time with Siemens, I guess. I don't know how far we've gone with implementing or actualizing that agreement. And now we are into this again. A two-in-one question. What do you make of this? And how attractive is this sector at the moment for investors?
Okay, to be honest, it's not that attractive, particularly when you speak to off-grid. Now, when you speak to on-grid, now what I've seen investors do, and I advise a lot of investors, the first thing they're asking you, particularly when they want to do something with government or a state, is an ISPO, an irrevocable standing payment order, such that their payment is a first-line charge of any money coming to that state when they share money monthly. You understand your monthly allocation. It's a first-line charge. Before the money drops into your account, they take their money. That's the only way investors are doing it, for those who want to do stuff that are sort of on-grid or connected to states and all of that. Otherwise, everyone else is doing off-grid, looking for a big company who can pay, who is maybe manufacturing, and they are sure they can pay for power. Otherwise, not many people are doing off-grid. See the debacle with Azura, and the controversies because of the take-or-pay issue. Because Azura and guys who advised on Azura, interestingly, one of the firms I'd worked in the past, that deal was starting when I then left. You know, they wanted to ensure that there was a take or pay because of the grid, so that the grid cannot take the power. They still get a particular amount, and I understand whether it's $10 million or sometimes a problem. You know, and that's even prevented. I know of a particular state, and I was working on that deal at some point, and they went to meet. They were at NERC. They were so excited about the deal, but when NEC told them the number for their take or pay, they ran away. And that deal didn't go on because it's expensive. Power isn't necessarily cheap, particularly if you've neglected the sector for a long time and you now want to accelerate. It's going to take a lot of work, a lot of sacrifice, and a lot of money. Theoretically, we have a good market design, but implementation is a problem. For example, that's why we have grid issues. You know, we should have a spinning reserve. We should have plants where if certain plants drop off, they can go on the grid. Because part of the reasons why the grid collapses is that a number of plants go off the grid suddenly, you know, or there's an imbalance. There's more plants on in the north, maybe, or in the south, and none in the north. You know, all of those issues. Market design, fine, but many things in Nigeria is implementation. To answer your question, it's not sufficient to sign contracts. Contracts usually have what they call CPs, conditions precedent. So you can sign, but it won't be implemented until you fulfill certain conditions to its implementation. Now, are we able to fulfill those conditions? Are we able to provide payment security? Those are the questions. Does the government have the money? Is it government who should be doing this? What we should have is a sector that is attractive enough for private investors to come and put down risk capital. It's not a situation where government continues to intervene. Yes, there are situations in every sector, in every country, where government does come to intervene so that sector doesn't go kaput. But a sector where government consistently intervenes suggests that there's something wrong, something maybe more fundamental than we all are discussing or all are dealing with. You intervene this year, a year and a half later you intervene, 2 years later you intervene on metering, 2 years later you intervene in paying gas fee, gas debts that have been outstanding. So all of this together just suggests that it's a big problem, to be honest.
It's a big problem. Dr. Oni, that is scary, a very big problem. But let's take it a step further and talk about how we can manage this. Yes, a new minister, he's there now since May, around June or something. But now, getting to work, there is a lot to be done with regards to power, transmission, distribution, generation. You know, it's a value chain. You've talked about that. What sort of conversations do you expect from Mr. Adelabu moving on? He has a lot to cut out for him. Look at what's happening with metering. I think there's another approval for a loan to also meter Nigerians. But what do you make of all of this, and where do you think it should start from? What sort of conversations are you expecting?
Okay, first, it's a conversation where you want collaboration. It's a conversation where you let investors know that the sector is open for investment. Now, despite the fact that he's a federal minister, or because he's a federal minister in connection with the most recent legislation, his powers probably are not quite what they used to be when we had NERC and a situation where the federation generally made the laws. Now, each state and a number of states, Ekiti, Ondo, Edo, Lagos, Enugu, a number of states already do have their own system, their own laws, or passing their own laws. And I know one of those states, I'm not sure whether it's Ondo, one of those states are actually going to meet NERC to hands off. There's a process where NERC will hands off regulating your state, and you have your own regulator, you make your own laws. So the powers of the minister isn't quite what it used to be, but he has to do a few things. You know, there's supposed to be an integrated planning, strategy, and implementation plan so that different states are not just working at cross purposes. He's supposed to be the coordinator of the decentralized system, because that's what the new Electricity Act does. It tries to encourage energy federalism so that each state can use its own resources, whether you have a lot of sunlight, solar radiation, and all of those to generate your own electricity, Enugu coal, and all of that. If you can do clean coal technology, because I know there are issues around energy transition and net zero and all of those, and decarbonization. So he needs to speak around policy direction. That's one thing everybody's waiting for. What is the policy direction around the decentralization? What are we going to do around renewables? What's the minister saying? What are the incentives? How is he supporting the presidency? There are reports that should go to the presidency every now and then. What's the minister doing, particularly around the strategic implementation plan? What's the minister doing to ensure that this starts so that each state knows what to do, how to do it, and there's a coordination? You understand? Those are critical things the minister needs to start doing, having those conversations, being in the lead. He said some good things, but it's not sufficient to just speak. You should walk the talk, So the minister needs to do stuff around policy direction, because the way the sector is structured and does make sense, the minister is more a policy maker. The regulator then implements the policy. But now we will have several regulators because each state is going to have their own. Not every state will do it, and that's the advantage of federalism. Because a state which does not have the capacity can still rely on the federal government, while states that believe they have the capacity can then go on their own. But there should be coordination, and that's what the minister should be doing. I hope he does have the right people in his camp who are advising him, because he can't do it alone. And besides, he's not, I wouldn't say he's a power sector expert. So it does need support, it does need the right team, and it does need to listen to them and implement. So it's policy direction, it's coordination, it's collaboration, and maybe even in some cases, wielding the big stick. For these distribution companies that are to be sold, they should push through the sales and let people who are more serious, who can do what they ought to do, take over these companies. Those are my own views. And let's do more around renewables, because you don't want to be left behind. When the world goes green, when we begin to do more around decarbonization and energy transition. Whilst I think we should continue to use our gas, because the world is beginning to realize that gas is the world's transition fuel, but we then need to begin to think about the future. So the minister needs to do more in terms of action, in my own view.
I must thank you so much, our energy analyst and lawyer, Dr. Ayodele Oni. We appreciate your contributions as usual. Have a great weekend.
Thank you very much for having me.